are going to move into an awesome panel. We've got a couple panelists that are here waiting in the back wings, and it is called Not Running a Space Startup. We've already done that one. Get rid of this piece of paper. It is about becoming a VC, how to become a VC. I do know a couple of the folks on the panel because the community is small, but Charles Hudson, who's moderating, I did a little intel on him last night. We don't know each other, but we have 70 connections in common on LinkedIn and 47 mutual Facebook friends, so I could probably find out a lot more. He has an amazing blog that he blogs all about technology. His background, he was in mobile and gaming extensively. He's now a partner with SoftechVC. He is investing in a lot of games, a lot of software. He was VP of Business Development for Serious Business. It was a social web and gaming company that was acquired by Zynga. He also has produced lots of conferences, so he knows what it's like to put one of these together. He's on the advisory board for BizWorld. He's also working with the MIT and the Stanford Venture Lab, so that's very interesting. Charles has agreed to moderate the panel today. He will be introducing our panelists, but we have Sarah Tavel with us, Eurie Kim, Hunter Walk, who I think I interviewed with once at YouTube a long time ago. It was probably the worst interview I ever had, but he's never brought that up, and I'm bringing it up now. Hunter Walk, and then Anna Diaz-Hernandez. So welcome our amazing panelists, and we'll have a brief Q&A afterwards too. So come on up, Charles. Great to meet you.
Thank you so much for
yes, thank you. Hunter, nice to see you again.
Feet don't fail me now. Feet don't fail me now. Feet don't fail me. Got to keep running. Got to keep running away. Feet don't fail me now. Feet don't fail me now. Feet don't fail me. Got to keep running. Got to keep running.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the Women 2.0 conference for having me. This is actually a panel I've wanted to do for a while, and when I was talking to the organizers about topics that'd be interesting to cover, one of the most common questions I get asked is, how do I get into VC? And I think you can give sort of generic advice to folks about what works, but I think the more interesting thing to do is actually hear real stories from folks who've been VCs, who are new to VC, who used to be VCs, and have them tell you their own personal journey about how they got into the industry. So the way I wanted to spend our time up here is I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give a brief sort of backstory on how they got into VC, giving you some sense for kind of what they learned along the way, what that break was that helped them get in the industry. And then I've got some specific questions for each of them. I also have to say this is the first panel I've moderated where I'm actually scared of my panelists. And I'm scared that at some point they might turn questions back on me. So they've already warned me of this in advance. So I think they've all got really great perspectives. I was fortunate enough to be able to handpick each of them because I think they each have a really interesting story about how they got into venture. So I'm going to have each of them, starting with Anna, working towards Hunter, talk about how they got into venture and give a little bit of background on them. And then I've got some specific questions for each of them, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A as well.
Great. Thanks, Charles. Can you hear me? Alrighty. Okay, here we go. So I got into VC about 6 months ago, actually, so quite recently. And prior to that, I had been at Dropbox and at another smaller startup. We were 7 people. But I did product marketing, sales, and internationalization. And so I had a wide range of experiences and wore a lot of hats. And I think I really built a passion for product, but specifically for targeting the Latino demographic. It's something I really am interested in. And it actually became a competitive advantage, let's say. It was something that the Kapor Capital really cares about. We're a social impact investment firm in Oakland, and we invest in companies that are gap closing, particularly for communities of color in the domestic market. And I actually met Mitch and Frida, who are the partners, through kind of their philanthropy. They care a lot about diversity in tech. We actually sponsored 5 scholarships for women of color to attend this conference, which was really fun. But so I met them through their philanthropy. I went to a lot of their diversity and tech events, and we really just built a relationship. And it was clear that my set of expertise and my background was something that was really attractive for them. When we were picking companies, a lot of them are actually targeting the Latino domestic market or the African American domestic market, or just communities that are typically underserved. And I've had a series of experiences both in international development and in product in these communities. And it was just something that was a really good fit for us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eurie. I'm an investor at Forerunner Ventures here in San Francisco. We are a micro VC fund investing in seed and Series A, specifically kind of fueling sort of the digital commerce revolution, so all things consumer, whether B2B or B2C. I had a bit of a serendipitous route to venture. I started my career at Bain, actually here in San Francisco, doing management consulting, focused on retail early. It was a passion of mine, mainly because I could touch and feel product and I could understand the consumer. After working there and consulting for larger retailers as well as private equity firms, I actually moved to a retail-focused private equity firm, specifically called Castanea Partners in Boston. And what was fun about that is we were doing growth equity, and so it was really a firm that was started by the former CEOs of the Neiman Marcus Group, and so they had run businesses for a while as a family, and so had been through the cycle of how do you think about succession planning, how do you think about going from a small business into a really large business. And so we had a differentiated perspective as a fund to invest with founders who had really grown big businesses by themselves with most of the time no capital, and were finally at a point in which they wanted to either take some money off the table or get a real management team, quote unquote. And so we would help with that. And that continued to fuel my interest in consumer. And I had an opportunity to then move to London to start an incubator for fashion designers. And as you know, venture plus fashion, like there's lots of unknowns, lots of ambiguity and risk, and it was super fun. But as with many startups, we had some bumps along the way, and the co-founders decided to part ways. And so I was sitting in London thinking, what should I do? I'd always wanted to start my own company, but didn't feel like I had the right idea, the right skill set yet. So I decided to go back to business school. So I went to Wharton for 2 years, and during that time I actually spent most of my energy and classwork on a business plan, and I leveraged all my classmates to work on marketing plans and consumer surveys and all that good stuff. And I ended up having the goal of launching a business after school. For personal reasons, I ended up having to move back to San Francisco a little bit quickly. And so I ended up not necessarily being able to focus on my business 100%, which I think all of you guys know is what you need, if not 1,000%. So I tabled that for a while, went back to Bain, and I think that was actually a great move too, because I ended up reconsulting for retailers, and of course the topic of the day was e-commerce. So re-engaged with all of the trends that were happening and what was kind of top of mind for large retailers in the space. And then after a couple of years, I realized that this was great. It really helped me fuel my sort of expertise in the space and get more contacts in the space. But passion was still in entrepreneurship, and so I set out to potentially do what Sarah did, which she'll tell you about. But very serendipitously, a friend of mine at business school was on the board of directors of one of our companies with Kirsten, who's the founder of our firm. And I met her, and she was starting this fund, and we really just connected. And so, there you go. It's some of the co-founder dating that I'm sure has happened here, but you meet and you really have aligned incentives and aligned goals. And so I just knew this was the right place to be, so I joined.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah. I actually am no longer a VC. I went over to the other side of the table. I'm now at Pinterest, where I've been for a couple years. But before that, I was at a firm called Bessemer Venture Partners for about 6 years. And my path into VC is pretty atypical. I don't know what the ages are of the people here. I joined Bessemer a year out of college. And what happened for me is I was actually at a strategy consulting firm that was a startup, not a very good one. And as it started to kind of, the downward spiral of death happened, I started to look for a new job. And I had always actually been interested in investing. I was one of those people who Even though because I didn't have money, I had a shadow public equities portfolio. I would before the internet, I would look at the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, and every Sunday, see what the stock price was for the random, stock tickers that I had chosen. So I was looking into kind of equity research type jobs, and was really lucky to speak to a friend of mine who I met in college, who is a couple years older and many years wiser than me, and started to tell her, hey, I'm looking at these jobs, and she said, you're pretty entrepreneurial in college, why don't you do venture capital? And I was like, what's venture capital? And so I really did not know what it was, and she explained it to me. She was actually working in private equity at the time. And she said, hey, well, why don't you look into it? I have a friend who's an associate there. And if you're interested, I'll pass your resume along. So I went to the neighborhood bookstore. I bought the Vault Guide to Venture Capital. It was very informative. I thought it was sounded really, really interesting, and so I ended up applying. They had an analyst role, and I was lucky because I had a lot of experience in ad sales. I made a good amount of money in college just selling ads. And the analyst role in these kind of venture firms, at least at Bessemer, was really this kind of process of dialing to give dollars. You're sourcing investments for the firm. And so having that kind of background in ad sales was what got me in the door. And I never thought I'd be there for 6 years, but that's what happened.
Great. Well, I'm a tall white guy with a Stanford degree and 9 years at Google. How can I not go into venture capital? My path, so Hunter Walk co-founded a fund last year called Homebrew with a partner that I had worked with at Google for several years. His background was actually a mixture of product leadership roles and venture, whereas mine was a straight operating last 9 years at Google and YouTube and a startup before that. So I sort of feel like we know the best practices of the industry, even if we choose not to always follow them. And that was important because what we really believe we've created as a startup, just one that writes checks instead of code. And so for me, the question isn't so much how to get into VC, because we did it the same way you start a business. We convince people that we have a good idea, and we get them to essentially write us a seed round, which is our first fund. But how do you stay in venture capital? There are no acqui-hires. There's no vanity metrics. We sort of think of our first fund as the chance to show that we belong, building sort of momentum and product market fit. Raise a second fund really on the back of momentum because you don't have true results yet. But when you hit that sort of 5-6 years into the profession, you start to have real data on your performance. And look, our investors can still personally like us. They can enjoy spending time with us, but they don't care, how many Twitter followers I have or, how nice a guy I am. It's investors who are, outsourcing their judgment, to a set of folks who are closer to the market, in this case, early stage technology, and looking for returns that, are upper quartile. So the people who've been in, venture for many years have found, some degree of who they are. They know their seat at the table. They know, why they belong. And, a lot of folks, myself included, have a hypothesis of, why we'll be successful. But, becoming a VC has less to do, I think, with sort of getting hired or raising a fund, and more figuring out what your path to that sustainable success is going to look like, whether the markets are up or the markets are down, whether you're, have picked a trendy vertical, or whether, you have an expertise that might be out of fashion at the moment. Because it's not just something you think about doing for a few years. It's something that you end up having to, especially if you're sort of taking money or taking a partner role, it's your next career.
So I'm curious, for those of you, particularly for Anna and Eurie and Hunter, looking back on your career, and now that you've got some time as a VC, whether it's 6 months or a few years under your belt, looking back, what were some of the experiences you had professionally in advance that you look back on them now and say, I'm really glad I did that. That was good preparation, or that was a good thing to have in my back pocket as I begin my life as a VC?
I can start. So I think one thing that amazes me every day is how much our job is about networking. And I know you guys all know that because you're trying to, find founders and find team members and find investors. But really, things that I did when I was really young, or jobs that I had that I thought would not matter, it turns out that I have a contact that one of you founders needs, and I can put you in touch with them. Or it turns out that some investor that I met at a very random event now moved to another firm. And so I feel like it's not just one thing that really stands out in my mind, but just knowing that every single kind of opportunity to meet someone is an opportunity that could come around another day and help you in another way. And so even something like this event here, I mean, you're meeting a ton of people, and you may think that the person next to you isn't that cool or whatever, but you never know who that person is, and it could be the person that's at this table next year,
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, if you're sitting next
Not
to
me.
Hunter, it's a little problematic, but.
I mean, I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I hadn't spent years on the operating side, if I hadn't been at startups, if I hadn't angel invested, all those things. But when I think about of the experiences that I've had, what gives me the best chance to differentiate myself and figure out what type of investor I am, I actually go back to sort of a love of journalism, writing, and actually my first startup was Late Night with Conan O'Brien back in its early days. And I worked in the research group, and basically I would research celebrity guests and write interview questions and sort of try to manufacture spontaneity. And I think so much, especially at the early stage, you don't have a lot of data to go on. You're not making investments as sort of the output of a spreadsheet or many years of trailing data or looking at sort of public market comps. You're trying very quickly to understand who are these founders, why are they doing this, what's their story. You often know less about the market than they do. I mean, hopefully you're investing in people who are experts in what they do. You're not able to sort of, over the course of an investment, take what's in your head and successfully transfer it into a founder. They need to have that long roadmap in their mind. And so trying to, over sort of a very condensed period of time, figure out what questions to ask, find a narrative, and find the story that's at the core of a company and a founding team, I think is really important when you're looking at early stage seed investments. And so when I think of all the stuff I've done, it's really rewarding to kind of touch that part of me again, as opposed to just the product manager part or just the investor part or just the networking part.
I think one of the most crucial decisions I made was joining a really early stage startup right after college. I learned so much. I was the 7th employee. And honestly, before that, I hardly knew anything about startups. They brought me on just because I think they saw a good product intuition and general curiosity. But I learned a ton. The company ended up shifting products several times, and we got acquired. And in that whole process, I just learned so much about what Silicon Valley was, how it operated, how acquisitions work. And I think that was really crucial as something that happened, at 1 or 2 years out of college.
And Sarah, I was going to ask you kind of the reverse, which is how are you using what you learned at Bessemer about dealing with companies in your dealings with startups now that you're at Pinterest?
It's a curveball.
Yeah.
So I guess in VC you learn a lot of things, and I think probably the single most important thing that you learn is how to ask the right questions. You're meeting with someone, they're selling you, and you have to figure out like what's really beneath the surface. What is the thing that's making this company tick, and eventually what's going to make this company a really, really big success? and that's the type of thing that you don't, it's like the Socratic method is a really important way of is like a really important thing for a reason. Like asking the right questions and really understanding how to get to the core of something it takes training, and I think it's one of those things that you can take for granted once you have it. But then I realized when I joined Pinterest and ended up being on the product side and like managing a team of more than a dozen engineers in a very, very technical area, despite the fact that I was a philosophy major in college, and the reason I was able to get by was because I could always ask the right questions. And I knew how to like move the conversation forward and really figure out like what's happening here without having my own domain knowledge. Because essentially, when you're a VC, it's kind of like what Hunter said. You're like no domain knowledge. Your domain knowledge is spread very, very broadly, but not really deep. And you get used to working in that framework. And so that's been incredibly important for me.
One more question for, since many of us, including myself, are still relatively new to VC, I'm just curious for each of you, what's been the hardest transition as you've become a VC? What's been sort of the hardest thing to grasp or understand or feel like you get good at in the job?
So I fancy myself a pretty optimistic person, and I really like people. So I really hate saying no all day long. And I think it's hard because if I see things through your perspective, I really can see where the opportunity is. But my job is to make sure that I'm doing a job for my own investors, and I'm in business so that the next idea you have somewhere to go for investment capital. And so I think that this idea of asking the right questions and helping to contribute to the founder's process and building a better business is something that I take to heart. And every day, if I have to write a no email or have a no call, it's really about what can I do to help improve your thinking and make your business better so that the next time you come back, it could be something where I can say yes. But I do admit for the first year or two, it was really hard. I'd get kind of sad every day having to say no, even though they're great ideas. And a lot of them are, well, pretty much all of them are great ideas, but we only invest in 1% of the ideas we see. So it's a tough business.
I'm going to say that one of the hardest things is just getting rid of your own biases. It's really easy to make assumptions about entrepreneurs or ideas based off of your lack of knowledge of them or your lack of being able to, I guess, understand their own experience, how they got to where they are. And I went to Stanford, very privileged in that sense. It's really easy to make assumptions about candidates who came from a very different background, who maybe didn't go to top school or aren't in Silicon Valley insiders. And that's something that we're really thoughtful about at Kapor Capital. We try to not even have a conversation about where they went to school. It's all about what have you done in the last few years? Where's your traction? Do you understand this community? Is it something that you have a personal connection to? Why are you doing it? And really all those other factors are secondary. Of course, you can't fully get rid of those assumptions. You just have to be aware that you have them, right? That's something we think about all the time, always working on those processes.
For me, and I knew this going in, but it doesn't make it any easier to experience, it's the lack of day-to-day metrics to sort of chart progress and be able to course correct. You've essentially purchased equities in a basket of companies that are all at different stages of their own development. And as I talked about earlier, ultimately we're judged by a return. And as companies exit or do funding or have to shut down, you can sort of update on paper what you imagine your outcome is tracking to, but at a level of detail that I'm much more used to. A 1% test of a new homepage. It's really hard to 1% test an investment strategy. We tend to be pretty hands-on and proactive, so our 1% test would probably be investing in a company and never talking to them again, and seeing if that actually outperforms us trying to be useful, which would kind of be a sad test result. But it's fun because in the absence of that, I've sort of created a few different ways of imagining. Well, how can we get proxies for? Are we seeing the right deals? Are we winning the percentage we should be? Is our help useful? And in all honesty, I'm sure half of the stuff I'm doing isn't at all a good use of my time. It's just sort of giving me this sort of false sense of well, I'm trying to figure out along the way. And talk to me a few years in, I'll be like, oh yeah, that was ridiculous. I don't know why I was tracking all of that data. And my partner, who's done this before, I think sometimes lets me kind of just run around in the yard like the puppy that's all excited and jumps up on the window. But it's moving from a world where you're able to measure everything acutely and test and multivariate test and optimize to one where you're making a bet, binary decision to invest or not, and then you're trying to be as helpful as possible to the entrepreneurs, but it's out of your control.
So I have more questions, but I want to pause and see if there's audience questions because I want to make this useful for you all as well. So if you have any questions, is that someone over there in the corner? It looks like.
Thanks so much for that. Oh, sorry, I'm pretty loud. Thanks so much for that awesome talk, guys. I really appreciate it. It's always really helpful just listening to personal stories from venture capitalists, because usually when you walk into a meeting, you don't usually think of, oh my gosh, they were once in your position, right? But I had just a very quick question about just evaluations and pre-seed as well as seed. Seed rounds have really changed within the past 5 years. Most of you will probably agree in regards to just companies actually coming out with a prototype and a working model as a seed, as opposed to, hey, I have an idea, this is how it's going to generate revenue, and invest money in me so I can grow it. So talk about, if you don't mind, a little bit about what you expect for a seed round today, as well as a pre-seed, and how you evaluate a company.
Sure. So at Homebrew, we invest almost exclusively as point of entry at seed. And for us, though, we don't have any particular dogma about what that means in terms of anywhere being from sort of pre-product to having bootstrapped for a year. I think there's a consistent set of questions we ask where, depending upon the nature of the business, the vertical the entrepreneur is in, or their experiences, that we get more or less comfortable with sort of different levels of progress. But the 4 things we try to figure out, I think 3 are pretty common to every firm, which is sort of, who is this team? How do they describe the problem they're solving, and what progress have they made? What, whether that be what have they built, or even more importantly, what have they learned? And then we probably spend a little bit more time than the average fund on this question of why. Why minimally do they want to spend several years of their life working on this? And because I think we tend to appreciate folks who are coming at this from a more mission-driven than an opportunistic standpoint. I think it makes founders better recruiters during those early years, and as well being able to sort of manage the ups and downs that are going to occur even in the fastest growing startup. So we don't have a particular sort of milestone that we expect a team to have hit, but we do expect some level of thinking and progress and validation that would cause a team to want to say, hey, we want your money and we want to spend what might be even more valuable multiple years of our time working on this effort.
Anything you want to add?
I can definitely understand the frustration. I'd say the shift is actually not even just 5 years, but 5 months. The size of the rounds that we're seeing have gone from 500,000 to 750, all the way up to like 2 to 3 million now for a seed. So I don't really know what to call them anymore. I think that at least in the consumer world, it's a confluence of a lot of factors. But a lot of what we're thinking about, at least at Forerunner, is that for us to fund a company, our goal then is not just to help, but like also to help you get your next round. And so we spend a lot of our time understanding what are the Series A investors looking for, what kind of traction do you need to show to get there. And I think what ends up happening is that those investors are actually looking for a lot more traction. And so you guys end up needing more money to show that traction. And as a result, it just kind of backs down the hill. And I think that because a lot of resources are more available nowadays, there are teams that can show a lot of traction with very little money and very, kind of capital efficiently. And I think we like to see that because we know no matter what amount of money you end up raising, the next round is probably going to be later than you want and less than you want and harder to find than you want. And so we need to know that this is a team that can be scrappy and just get out there. And, as Sarah was saying about asking the right questions, it's also like being brutally honest about what's the priority. Like, where do you need to be focusing your attention and your capital and your resources to be able to show that there's something special here that can at some point kind of accelerate into the hockey stick that everybody shows up on the last slide of their deck. And so it's a frustrating thing, but I think that it's better for you guys to know that that's what you're dealing with earlier on, instead of like getting $1 million, taking all that responsibility, and then hitting that same roadblock 12 months later. So we try to be really transparent about that. We obviously help our portfolio companies like day in and day out just to understand those needs and metrics, and try to march towards sort of the ever-moving bar that we're all up against.
Okay, wow, quite a few questions. I'm going to do my best to spot people based on when I saw their hands go. So I think over here.
Hi, guys. So kind of what Hunter was talking about earlier, but you're doing a lot of pattern matching. You're seeing things that you've seen before or you're familiar with, and you can recognize that it's going to be successful in the future. Or you can find that something special before someone else, maybe. and maybe they've got traction, maybe they don't. What do you do when there's something that you do get the feeling it's special, but it maybe doesn't have a bucket that it falls into, or isn't something you're totally familiar with? How often do you see companies like that, and how do you handle it when that happens?
So I guess I think of it from two ways. One, as investors, my primary job is to make money for the folks who have, sort of banked on me, and I believe I do that by finding entrepreneurs who, see the world in a different way than others do, and have the ability to get there. When it's in a space that I have no familiarity with, I guess I sort of try to go through two things quickly. One is, can I get a third data point? So like what they're telling me is one data point, what I'm reacting to is one data point. Is there a third data point I can get from somebody who is an industry expert or has been spending time on this? The second thing I ask is, do I think we're going to be useful beyond capital in helping them achieve their goals? So even if it's not a type of project that I have direct experience with, are the types of challenges they're going to be facing in recruiting, in understanding product prioritization, in thinking through their business model, in further fundraising. Does it look like the type of activities that we know how to do and that we've set up Homebrew to be able to assist with? If I can get positive indicators on both of those, then great. I mean, at the seed stage, we should be investing in areas that we don't know a lot about or the world's not thinking about yet. If we're trying to just get into verticals that are hot and trendy, then we're too late. People have been working in those long enough. But I think what the entrepreneur can do in those situations is try as best as possible to not just pitch, but to educate the investor and help give them information beyond just sort of personal references that are going to attest to how great you are. To help them get comfortable in the space and to ask those questions directly. Because very often that sort of, I just don't know and I haven't seen this before and I don't know how to describe it as it's a blank for blank or it's this on steroids. Sometimes it prevents people because you'll sometimes hear that investing is sort of fear-based. Your fear of getting left out. I actually don't believe that. I think the best investors don't operate from a place of fear. They operate from a place of love and a place of excitement. And so I think it's also finding the right investor who has that willingness to sort of jump into the unknown with you and assume that the ground will form under them, as opposed to wanting to spend weeks and months with you getting comfortable that the ground already exists.
Yeah, so we actually look for those companies that most people think are strange, right? The companies that most people wouldn't give a second look at. One company in particular that we are really excited about right now is called Pigeonly. And it was started by a formerly incarcerated person who I believe did not go to college, or if he did, he went after he got out of prison. But he is an entrepreneur who's building something for the community that he knows, right? So he's building a communication platform to help connect prisoners with their families and then help them reintegrate into society again. So they're building other products as well. But none of us on the investment team had any experience with being in prison or having family members in prison. And that's something that, luckily we have a network of community organizations that we work with, advisors, that are able to help us really kind of sort through that. This particular investment is very different from what we normally see. Who can we talk to get more information about it? And so we actually look for stuff like that. That's what we most care about investing in.
Okay.
The person under the exit sign.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Hunter. Back over there by the exit sign. Oh, just waiting on the mic, I guess.
This is more of an anecdotal question, but what percentage of your decision is gut feeling?
Wow.
And we've talked about metrics and everything that's pragmatic.
There are any LPs in the room, are there?
Oh God. Well, I mean, I'd have to say that the majority of every decision I make is gut feeling. Just because there's normally not. I mean, it's so early. So it's not just gut feeling, like stick a finger in the wind and does this person, do I like being around this person, or does this person remind me of somebody? It's they're showing me data, and what evidence do we have that is going to progress at the curve that they suggest? Like They tell me they've got 3 engineers waiting to join them as soon as the funding closes, but they can't reveal who their names are. Like, do I have a gut feeling that I trust who this person is based upon our interactions, what other people have told me about that? So I don't think it's gut intuition as a randomness or a lack of interest in data, but I think at the end of the day, if my gut is telling me no, I don't care what the data says, I'm not going to do the investment.
Just a quick point on that too, and it I think ties back to the prior question. If you know your space, so we invest only in consumer-related businesses, your gut feeling is actually founded in as much data as possibly exists, like in this very early stage. And so if I've seen 5 of my companies go through something kind of similar to what you're telling me you're going to go through, then I can gauge whether I believe you or whether I think that you're actually not thinking about something big that's about to happen, in 6 months. Or what might be hard versus easy. So I think it's gut feeling as what we get excited about and what we think their opportunity is. But then, given my background in kind of the investing and management consulting, like I do a plethora of work on market research and competitive stuff, and we do a customer survey on everything that we look into pretty heavily. I do a financial model, so I do all of that stuff, but it never makes the decision. It only deters the decision. But the real decision has to come from your heart, because we're getting married to you guys. Like, we're with you for a long haul, and we're going to be there with the ups and the downs. And so if your heart's not into it, no amount of diligence is going to make me feel better about it.
Yeah, and speaking for us as well, I've worked with everybody on this stage in some capacity. I think what we've also committed to do is try, if we do pass, try to provide real feedback. Either something about something that we've seen before that, hey, this is one data point, but you might want to think about this, or even if it's just feedback on the pitch. Saying, look, again, one data point, see how other people are reacting to this, but I think the story got murky here. And sometimes that's not, everybody wants to always use that as sort of an opportunity to objection handle, like, oh, if I can just convince them this. And the truth is, and I guess one of every X number, you can sort of reopen the door, but for the most part, we've kind of moved on and made this decision, but I think it takes a lot of guts to come in and tell somebody about your dreams, your business. I know it sometimes may feel like it's asymmetrical power because you're asking us for a check, but I think we all approach it as this is a dual choice. Every step of the way, you should be learning more about us to figure out if we're the right partner, and ask whatever questions you want, do whatever homework you want on us to make sure that you want another co-author of your biography, because when you bring an investor on board, they're going to be around for a while, and they bring their own narrative of what needs to happen, of what success looks like. So don't just try to tell any investor what you think they want to hear. Ask them the questions that are going to give you the information to figure out if they're the right partner for your business.
And Sarah, do you think about teams that come in to pitch or talk to Pinterest and sort of through the same lens when they're thinking about acquisitions or bringing on new talent?
Generally, it's generally when I'm bringing in other companies for potential. I do corporate development at Pinterest, which means that I'm always evaluating companies now with a very different lens, which is, can these people add value to Pinterest, or have they built something that I think will accelerate our time to market for a product we're working on, or even our monetization plan. And so generally, it's very gut when I meet people, because as you and it's similar to what Eurie was saying, as you meet more and more people, you develop a data set that's in your brain and connected in ways that you can't possibly understand or know. And so when you actually meet someone, you're very quickly doing some kind of regression analysis in your brain of whether you think that person will have an outsized impact, or their technology will. So it's generally kind of a similar approach.
Yeah. I think here in the middle, and then I'll go to the back.
I'm thrilled that this is on the discussion panel, the whole concept of finance. I think it's so critical, obviously. But I've got a question for actually just the ladies, if I may. Given the fact that 6%, only 6%, women represent only 6% of the senior roles in the financial world, that's across hedge funds, VC, and anything else you want to categorize. How is it that we can encourage more women to know more about finance, particularly since 2 out of 3 women also state that they know little to nothing about finance? and how do you encourage them? For those of you who may have been in a financial program at school and college, how do you overcome the issues that are related to math as it stands for getting more girls, starting with the younger set, and women? Thank you.
Well, that's a very tough one. I will say that Kapor Capital, our investment strategy goes hand in hand with our philanthropy. The Kapor Center for Social Impact works a lot on pipeline issues, and so we have summer programs that we fund through the Level Playing Field Institute. They're called SMASH, and we bring young girls from underrepresented backgrounds. We put them through summer programs for 3 years in a row. They're STEM, computer science. I forget everything they cover, but they're really comprehensive. They have mentors. They have a very low teacher-to-student ratio and student-to-teacher ratio. And they, by the end, are really successful in getting into top programs and going into STEM careers. It's been going around, I think the program has been around for about 8 years, but I mean, I think we think about it really strategically, and it's something that you have to start really, really early. I mean, preferably before high school, right? And it's not something that can be solved in college. I mean, by that point, I mean, there are interventions to be made, but I think it needs to start before that.
So when I joined Bessemer, I was the only woman there, and I think I was the first woman hired in many years. And it was, I'll admit, like a really big shock to my system to be the only woman in a firm of, I mean, I was 25 at the time, ended up growing to more than 40. And the thing that I realized, and like what I do personally, I don't have an answer for you in like a scalable way. There's people who are much smarter than me thinking about that. But I think like for women, like one of the things that I noticed the most about myself and the way that I acted that was different than the way like my male colleagues were acting was that I don't know if any of you read Lean In. I really recommend it because I think one of the most important things that we as women have to be and do is to become aware of the own self-bias that we have for ourselves. It's almost like I joke I needed a bracelet like what would a white man do? Because, it's like really...
What would Hunter do?
But it's, like there's studies like when a woman like takes a test and says like how, they ask like how did you do? And the same question to a guy, like a guy's gonna think they did better than they actually did, and a woman's gonna think they did worse than they actually did. There are just so many examples where we hold ourselves back. I really believe that. And so I think like when people come to me and they ask like, how do I get into VC? Or they're actually in a VC already and they're kind of telling me, I just tell them like, hey, you can't wait for things to come to you. You have to go out and get them. Like you have to like be aware of the own things that are keeping you back that for whatever reason you've been socialized to do or feel or any of those things. I think that that's also the responsibility that we all have when we meet other women, is to just make everybody aware that we do hold ourselves back in some ways. I think there's a lot of subconscious bias that holds us back too. I don't want to put it only on ourselves. I think there's a lot we could talk about off the record. But I think that's one of the biggest things that I'd recommend, is just becoming self-aware. And I do think Lean In has a lot of value in that way.
And hand in hand with that goes also mentoring others, right? If you have the ability to, if you see somebody who's talented and they just need a little push, like being there for them and even telling them about VC, right?
The little red light's telling me that I've exceeded my time on stage. So thank you all. Do I have time for one more question, Shai, or no?
Well, I have a question for you while I'm handing out gifts. So
okay.
Come on. Thank you. It was an amazing panel, and we do have gifts. But while I'm handing out the gifts, I loved hearing about the prison company that you invested in, and I thought maybe while I'm handing these out, if you could each share something that you've invested in recently and why you're interested in it. And Charles, I'm going to give you this, and then I'll sneak around. So Hunter, maybe if you want to start with something you've invested in.
Sure. So one of the investments that is here local in San Francisco is a company called Ship, SHYP with a Y. And it's fun because a lot of companies are focusing on sort of what they call last mile delivery. How do you get a package from a store to somebody's house, same day delivery? And Ship is somewhat uniquely focused on the first mile. So how do you help a consumer, a small business, an e-commerce retailer, an individual proprietorship like an Etsy seller, not deal with shipping and logistics, which today are sort of big infrastructure costs? The person who's sort of selling 25 handcrafted candles shouldn't have to be a logistics expert in order to run their business. And from a homebrew perspective, we focus on what we call the bottom-up economy, which is how do consumers, small businesses, developers take advantage of technology for new revenue streams, efficiencies, marketplaces, and before ways that didn't exist or were only available to the large guys. So I love companies where I get excited not just about their mission, because as a platform, but then you start to see how they're people are actually using it, and you're just amazed by being able to sort of strip costs out of the fact that now everybody has the opportunity to be an entrepreneur.
I have not invested for 2 years, so I'll pass.
I recently invested in a company called Sproutling here in San Francisco. Super excited about it because here at Forerunner we really want to invest in the next brands of sort of our generation. And so what Sproutling does is it's a little bit like a Fitbit for a baby, which I normally don't like to do X of Y, but it's easier described that way. But think about baby monitors in general, completely outdated. Parenting has changed and evolved, and we're all now technology enabled. So why can't we be also using that intelligence to help us be better parents when we have children? And so it's pre-product. They're working on building out the product now, and hopefully we'll be up for pre-sale maybe in the summertime. So keep your eyes out. Sproutling.
Awesome.
Had the prison one. And Charles, something you're excited about?
Boy, I haven't made a new investment since October. I've been slow. So probably for me, I get excited just about seeing my company's progress. And I have a company that we started from scratch. We were the first money in pre-product that hopefully today is closing Series A. So I can't say the name of the company, but that's one that I'm really excited about because it was a rare case where it was really two founders in a napkin, and we gave them a little bit of money, and they're really off to the races now. So
well, thank you all for being here and for giving us your time today.